Hususukanigawam, Takahamin, welcome. We have just over 200 people and more coming in, so I'm just going to wait for this waterfall of beings to join us in the room and say thank you so much for joining us. 400, here we go. Just so that we can continue to flow, I'll just say a quick hello. I'll introduce Jenna, and then we will introduce our main speaker, Sophie. 500 people joining us. That is so wonderful. Thank you so much. And so, indeed, Hususukani Gamwam, Tikahamin, Hugaklik Jade, Hunini with Gathuma, Hugakiaki England, Hugawa Kasani, Katanmitik Wiskakas. Hello, my name's Jade. I'm here as the big mouth, as the person that speaks and introduces, and very soon I will be quiet. I'm from England and I live in the land of the Mishkakas, the land of the chickadees, for the Tanaha people, otherwise colonially known as Revelstoke, British Columbia. Please type any questions that you have into the Q&A boxes, or you can pop them into the chat, but the Q&A is the best place. We're going to collect all of those and then Jenna and myself will pose them to Sophie at the end of her presentation. If you have a moment and you have this knowledge, we would invite you to share a land acknowledgement or an appreciation of the Indigenous territory that you join us from today. And if you take a moment to share that in the chat and ensure that you are going to hosts and panelists and everybody can see the information that you're sharing. I join you from the territories of the Snipes people. It's also known, cherished, hunted, fished and travelled upon by the Tanaha, the Secwepemc and the Okanagan Stilts people. Hususukini, I'm grateful to be here. And so I'd like to introduce Jenna Jasic, who will kick us off today. So alongside being an Indigenous advisor to the Outdoor Learning Store, our organisation, Jenna is the District Vice Principal of Indigenous Learning and Equity for the Rocky Mountain School District number 6. Jenna strives to provide students opportunities to explore, learn and immerse themselves in the outdoors and outdoor education. Jenna took the lead on this Every Child Matters year-long learning challenge. The pilot, over 100 schools and organisations and over 1,000 people joined us. And they signed up in an effort to deepen their understanding of Indigenous knowledge, culture, history, challenges and the perspectives. Jenna was the 2022 recipient of the Community Literacy Award for Windermere Valley, where she lives. In addition to that, I'm honoured to call Jenna a friend and a mentor, and I hope you find listening to her and the people that she's brought into our lives as much as I do. Sukini, thanks, Jenna.
Hi, everyone, and welcome from across Turtle Island. My name is Jenna Jasic, as Jade said. A little about me is that I'm Secwepemc and Tanaha. My great-great-grandfather was the last hereditary chief of the Kiskanik First Nation in Windermere. And yeah, I'm really grateful to be here and honored that everyone is joining. I'm really want to talk about the importance of the land and how learning from the land is really learning our truth and reconciling with Indigenous people. The land is really our greatest teacher, and when we learn from the land, it really does help us understand the people and the languages where we are. And so being part of Truth and Reconciliation is just just weaves together so beautifully with learning just how important the land is and our local land is to everyone, and just how much beautiful stories that our land can tell with our ecosystems and everything around us really has such great lessons, and those are how my ancestors lived, was off of the land. And so I just would encourage everyone to try and get outside every day and really look for one piece outside that you can learn from, because it's there for a reason. And that's the most beautiful thing, is that every single thing out there is, there's one reason or two reasons or many reasons why it's there. And yeah, and that's the beautiful thing about it. So with our learning, we have partnered with First Nations University of Canada, Reconciliation Education, the Outdoor Learning Store, and Rocky Mountain School District 6. Those are our core partners, but we also have a variety of other partners that we're so grateful to help us be able to offer this course and these wonderful presenters. And I'm so honored to be inviting and having Sophie Pierre speak with us today. Sophie's the former chief of ACAM and appointed chief commissioner of the BC Treaty Commission from April 2009 to 2015 by the agreement of the Government of Canada and British Columbia and the First Nations Summit. She was recognized by the Order of Canada in 2016. She also received the Order of British Columbia in 2002 and the National Aboriginal Achievement Award in 2003. Sophie's been in my life just as a role model for as long as I can remember. She was always someone that I looked up to, and even though we don't know each other very well, I just honor her, and I'm so grateful for her being such a warrior and really taking a stand and standing up for Indigenous people, First Nations. And I was just, whenever I would see her, I always just thought she was just like a queen, so beautiful and knows her language and is just such an amazing person. And so I'm so grateful to be recognizing you today, Sophie, and I'm really excited to hear about your stories. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Jenna. Thank you for those kind words. And I'm happy that to be here with you all today. And thank you very much for inviting me. I know that this particular group of partners and what you're doing with outdoor learning and with Columbia Basin and school districts and college and everything, it's what needs to be done. It's really what it can meet a lot of the sort of the holes that have been left in our education system for so long. And so it's really nice that we have this opportunity to have more learning going on, particularly around Indigenous issues, particularly around Canada's history, the real history of our country, our beautiful country, and all the wonderful people that we have here. I know that the announcements that started to come out about the discovery started in Kamloops, and I know just went right across the country. And I know that felt like a real kick in the gut for the majority of Canadians. They're like, people are thinking, how can this be? It was hard to believe. And as Indigenous people, we know how hard it is for everyone to believe, because this is the message we've been giving for decades and nobody believed it. And then now, it's getting to the point where we know that there is much more to Canada's history than what we have been taught in schools. And I'm so grateful that we now have school districts, we now have governments that are prepared to actually ensure that we are learning Canada's true history, that we're starting with truth in order to move into reconciliation. I know that is, like everybody is saying that now, everyone's starting to realize We had the commission, Truth and Reconciliation. We had all their recommendations came out there, 4 volumes. Majority of Canadians didn't realize that one whole volume, I think it was the 3rd volume, was full of the stories about residential school and about missing children. It was all there. And, it wasn't until, of course, what happened in Kamloops that we started to really look at it and to appreciate it. So I just want to say a couple of things as I get started. First of all, is that in about 10 minutes, my 7-year-old granddaughter is going to run in here and she's going to make a lot of noise, even though she knew this morning that I was going to be doing this afternoon. So there may be just a little bit of noise, but she's really good. She'll get into the program pretty quick. But I just want to warn you that is going to happen soon. And my husband's going to walk by because he still doesn't get the concept that you can see him when I'm on this when I'm doing one of these Zoom meetings. So what I want to talk about, just spend the next little while, is I want to talk sort of generally about residential schools and why they happened. And then I want to talk specifically about the residential school that is here at St. Eugene that we now have as a resort. And then I want to end off by telling you why we, as the Ktunaxa and the Shuswap Indian Band, why we made the decision to turn that former residential school into the resort that it is. So that's all I'm going to have time for this today. There's so much more that I would love to have discussions about, but anyway, we can always do that at another time. So I want to start off by saying, okay, residential schools, like why did that happen? Where did that whole idea come from? And like everything that is within the history of the newcomers, the settlers, and the Indigenous people here in the Americas, it started with the concept that was developed by a papal bull called the Doctrine of Discovery. And it's really important that particularly those of you that are in the classrooms that are trying to understand all of this, it's really, really important for you to understand that, or it's really important for you to really understand what is the Doctrine of Discovery and why it is important. Because the whole belief of people coming from one part of this planet to another part of our planet, thinking that if there's the place where you're going to, if it is not inhabited by people who are Christians, then it is open for the taking. There's nobody there, nobody worth considering. That is the basis of the Doctrine of Discovery, and that's what started the whole thing here in the Americas, but not just here in the Americas, all over the world. So that's really where, if you understand that, you start to understand why policies, why laws, Canadian law was written the way that it was. So Canadian law, as we became this fledgling country and had our confederation and started to come together from coast to coast to coast as a country, and laws started being written. There was a section that was actually written called the Indian Act, and it had to do specifically with Indigenous people. And it still exists today. We still have an Indian Act. So that's another whole discussion for another day, why it's still there. But, there we have the Indian Act, and it was, as it was developed, the intent was to ensure that the Indigenous people's land, like here, where I am, where I'm sitting in Amak Esktunaxa, that those lands were available for the settlers. So something had to be done with these, we were called Indians, the Indigenous people here that are across this country. So all these laws were written, the laws regarding the land, the laws regarding what Indian people could and could not do on those lands. And then there was also realization that in order for true colonization of the country, it was necessary that the spirit and the culture and the language of Indigenous peoples, that could not continue in order for the colonization to actually take hold, that it was really necessary to eliminate that. And how would you do that? Well, there's a couple of ways. First of all, within the Indian Act, there was a section that said that when Indigenous people, when an Indigenous man married, if he married someone who was not Indigenous, then she was from then on considered to be Indigenous. And anyone who is an Indigenous woman, if she were to marry someone who is non-Indigenous, or that was someone who was considered, even though they were Indigenous, was considered by the government, was not recognized by the government as being Indigenous, then she lost all her quote status. And so that's how you break up families, right? You just take away, saying that you no longer belong to your people, you no longer belong with your people. So that was one way. Another way, of course, then is to take the children and to bring the children, not let them have the exposure to their family, to their culture, to their religion, to their language. And so how do you do that? Putting them in these schools. And the residential schools, there's another very important, I guess, source of where these schools came from and why they came about, is someone called Duncan Campbell Scott. And he's the one that actually mandated school attendance, like mandated these residential schools to be built, and that it was parents could be thrown in jail if they did not send their children. Police were always involved. Indian agents were involved. And so he had stated, "I want to get rid of the Indian problem." Hang on, I need to remind my granddaughter that she needs to be quiet. Bree, you need to be quiet, please. Anyway, he is, his statement was, "I want to get rid of the Indian problem. I do not think, as a matter of fact, that the country ought to continuously protect a class of people who are unable to stand alone." That's a really interesting idea, isn't it? Why would you consider that these people are unable to stand on their own? Well, all of their land has been taken away, and they're no longer available to, they're no longer have the ability to provide for their families the way that they always had. So he goes on to say, "Our objective is to continue until there is not a single Indian in Canada that has not been absorbed into the body politic, and there is no Indian question, no Indian department, that is the whole object of this bill." So it was very clear that the idea of these residential schools were to be run. There was an agreement made with various churches to operate these schools and to ensure that the children were taught in English and that they had no connection to their families, no exposure to their cultural traditions, and that they in fact learned how to be absorbed into the Canadian body politic, as Duncan Campbell Scott said. He was also credited with, or he is credited with also creating the laws that made it impossible for Indigenous people to seek legal assistance to argue for protection of their lands. So again, you know, it was not just the residential school. There's a whole body of law that has been on the books, that has been enacted, law, and then policies forming from it, that have created the situation that we find ourselves in today. So I think that that is really important. You know, we've got a lot of discussion right now about residential schools, and there's a lot of kind of thinking, and it's been suggested that maybe the reason that we have situations that we have today, that it's all because of the residential school. Residential schools had a very, very large impact, but that's not the only thing. There are many, many other reasons why we have the situation that we have today. And this is where, you know, when I talk about that, we need to know the truth, that the truth needs to be taught in our schools, in our universities, and that we as Canadians, that is our history. That is Canada's history. We need to own it. And then we need to change it. We need to ensure that we don't have this for all future generations, that we make changes, that we know. And in order to change something, you have to understand why we are in the situation that we are in today. So that's sort of just a quick encapsulating where we came from, you know, why there was residential schools in place. So the residential school that I personally attended for 9 years, it is just outside of the town of Cranbrook. It is here within Amag-Esctonecha, just adjacent to my Indian Reserve, my community. My community is Akam. It's also known as the St. Mary's Indian Reserve. And it is one of 4 Ktunacha Indian reserves. We have one that's right on the 49th parallel. It's called Tobacco Plains. Akin Kumtlasnokle'it or Yakit Aknokle'it is the name of that community. And then there's Gisknuk, which is to the north of us in the Columbia Valley, and Yaqanoke, which is in Creston, and Akam, which is here. And then we also have the Shuswap Indian Band that is also in the Columbia Valley, that is just near Invermere. So it is these 5 Indian reserves that I'm going to be talking about when I talk about what we did and why we did it. But so we are the missionaries that originally came here were French Catholic missionaries. They were the Jesuits, and then I'm sorry, I don't remember the group that followed them, but the Jesuits, they were the ones that, quote, found us first. So we end up with a lot of French names, you know, when they couldn't say our names, so they started to give us French names. We have, like, my name is Pierre, Michelle, my name previously, my mother's name was Eustace, and then we have just like many French names. When I'm asked, you know, like, why is your, you know, why do you have a name like Pierre? Say, well, that's the response. The French found us first. Quote, found. The French, they found their way here first. Had it been the Anglicans, then my name maybe would be Brown or Green or White or one of those names. Anyway, just a little joke that I like to make about the early missionaries that came into our traditional territories. So we had the Jesuits were here, and they built a church and created this mission. And then as the policies were formed for building residential schools, the Catholic Church entered into an agreement with the federal government, the Department of Indian Affairs in particular, to build a residential school here. It was it started out like a lot of these schools, they were called not residential schools, they were, oh, I'm going to forget the term right now. I'm sorry, I'll come back to it. But that they started building our school in 1910. Now, before that, there was another smaller, just like a log building, that the children would attend, on a daily basis, possibly. But they were like they were not in residence. So there was education going on with the Jesuits before the residential school was built. It was only once that policy was put in place and the agreement was made between the church and the federal government that we had this. Ah, yes, Shelley, thank you. Industrial schools, that's what they were called. Thank you so much for that. Yeah, and that's what our school was called when it was first built. It was an industrial school. And it opened in 1912 and it stayed open, and some 5,000 to 7,000 students went through that, and it closed in 1970. I was personally a student there from 1956 to 1965. So for the first few years, there was not a tremendous take-up of sending children of our people, of our families wanting to give up their children for 10 months of the year. And so, of course, the RCMP had to become involved, as did the Indian agent. And it was not a happy time when grandparents who did not speak English could not understand why their grandchildren would be taken away for months at a time. The grandparents were saying, well, no, like you can't keep them away for that long. When am I going to be able to teach them? What I need to teach them, they need to know, how to hunt. They need to know, how to survive. They need to know how to gather medicine. They need to know our ceremonies. Why you can't be taking them away for that long. You can go in, they can go in with you for a couple hours a day, but and as a grandmother, I can certainly understand how those grandparents and those parents would have felt. I mentioned my little granddaughter was here now. She's 7 years old. I think about when I was 7 years old and being right now, I was in that place. So it became more and more because it was so heavily policed, and it was just the parents understood that if they did not follow through, and that they could end up in jail. And more parents were allowing their children, they gave up on their children, and they had them go into the residential school. So by the time it was my turn, 1956, many years later, I asked my mother, why? Because my mother, I remember totally clearly the day she brought me there. I remember because I was so excited. She had bought me a new dress and I had brand new shoes. They were beautiful little Mary Janes. Those of you that are anywhere in your over 50, you'll know what Mary Janes were. And little socks and everything. So I was pretty proud of myself. I figured I looked pretty good, and I was going to go over and we were going to go to the school. And it didn't occur to me that meant I was going to have to stay there. So I asked my mom, I said, why did you bring me there? And what did it feel like when you brought me there? And she said, because I didn't want them to come and take you away. She said, that would have been harder on you and on me than it was for me to bring you there. Well, I'm not sure that I ever really totally agreed with her on that, because I remember that it was pretty traumatic once I realized that I was not going to be going home with her, and I saw her leaving. So I was there for 9 years, and we had the Sisters of Charity were our teachers at the time. When the school first opened, they were another group of nuns that were there, but those nuns, they moved into Cranbrook and actually ran the hospital. And so the Sisters of Charity had come in, and they were the ones that were running the school for and being the teachers and looking after the girls. On the for the priest, they were the oblates of Mary Immaculate were the priests and brothers, and the priests, there was a head priest that was the principal of the school, and a couple of brothers that looked after the boys. So that's what a typical day for us would be. You get woken up in the morning, like I would guess around 6:30, from the time that I was just a little girl. And well, actually, for the first couple of years, we didn't have to get up as early as the older kids, because we didn't have to go to church. Grades 1 and 2, we got up, and we had someone that stayed with us, but everyone else went to church. And that was every single day. You went to chapel, and then breakfast and cleaning up, doing chores, and then into the classroom. So we did have lessons that were from 9 till about 3. And we did, the usual reading, writing, arithmetic, we did social studies and history and, all of that, English. And yeah, so that is, I guess, though, that is one thing that I am grateful for in terms of the residential school, is that I feel that I got a pretty solid basic education. I can still, even in my my late years now, when I'm buying something, I can make change a lot faster than the 20-year-olds. I can do that in my head, and I credit that to the very strict kind of teaching that those nuns put us through. But it's worthwhile. It's something that I have valued, and it has done me very well throughout my life. What is it's all those other things. When I am asked what it was like to grow up there, I say that it was a very cold and lonely place for any child to grow up. That's not the way children should be raised. That all of you know how important it is for a child to feel love. There was no love in those buildings. I think that everyone understands that. And I didn't really understand who I was. We had school for 10 months of the year. We went in September and came back home in June. And when I went in, I was fully fluent in my Ktunaxa language. That's all that was spoken in my home. Very, very little English was spoken in my home. When I came back out, my mother, by then, she spoke, a fair amount of English to me. But my grandmother, she couldn't speak English. Her only language was Ktunaxa. She had a few English words, some maybe not the best words, but she also knew things like coffee, money, dollars, quarters, she knew things like that, but she could not carry on a conversation. So whenever I came home, I just fell right back into the Ktunaxa language and to who I was as Ktunaxa. And I know that is what saved me. That is what helped me throughout my whole life, because I have been fully fluent in my language for my whole life. A lot of the students that I went to school with that went in speaking no English, being punished so terribly for not speaking properly, according to the nuns, they have not been able to remain fluent speakers. They are silent speakers. They know, they have the language in their heart. It's just, it's very difficult to speak it. So we're working very hard with that. We're starting to understand a little bit better just what happens to a person when a language is pulled out of them like that. What happens to that person, and how you can bring it back in and make it a part of your life again, and make it a part of your heart again. And I'm really grateful that we have, the kind of programs available, the funding support that is really necessary for us to do the really important work that needs to be done to reinforce for ourselves the Ktunaxa language. The Ktunaxa language is an isolate language in the Americas. And it's kind of, I mean, it's a really fascinating fact, particularly if you're a linguist, to figure out why there would be a indigenous isolate language that is surrounded by language families, like that are huge language families, the Salishan languages, the Athapascan languages, like there's all these language groups that are around us, but we cannot speak with them. They don't understand us, we don't understand them. It's a totally different language. And here we are in the Rocky Mountain Trench with the Ktunaxa as an isolate language. So it is only up to Ktunaxa to keep this language. If we lose it, it is lost to the world. And so I say to anyone that has made their home here in Amakis Ktunaxa, that responsibility also becomes your responsibility. If this is your home, this is the only place in the world that the Ktunaxa language is spoken. And so all of us who are living here together as neighbors, there's no reason why we can't all say "Giso gyukiet" when we see each other. How are you? I'm well. There's place names that we have. We know where our Amakis Ktunaxa is because that's where we have place names. So we have place names all the way from the like the Y to Y. And I know I won't even go into that because it'll take me down a whole rabbit hole and I'll take up a lot more time. But within our language, we have it from south of Missoula, Montana, at Missoula, Montana's Tohulnana, all the way up to the northern part, which is Yakleki, and over to the Arrow Lakes. That's Akinkanokakuknok. We have many place names in there, places like today, Revelstoke, that's Ktunawakan Mituk Mitskakas. Castlegar. Castlegar is really easy because it means where two rivers meet, because that's the Kootenai River and the Columbia. They meet at Castlegar. That's Kiksitluk. That's where waters blend. That's Kiksitluk. Cranbrook is Akiskakleet. And then we've got Columbia Valley, Akisknok, and many place names. So when we are in our Amakis Ktunaxa, we know we are in Amakis Ktunaxa because we have the place names for it. We have the language, and it's an isolate language, and we have to ensure that isolate language is here forever. Anyway, I kind of got off on a bit of a tangent there. So just getting back to the what it was like in residential school, and I said like it was a very difficult place for a child to grow up. Our particular school went from grade 1 to grade 8. And then until I think really in about the mid-40s, that was kind of the end of the school life. But then around the mid-40s, it all kind of has to tie in with the Second World War, because there were a lot of Indigenous people that, even though they were not Canadian citizens, they had no citizenship, they joined the armies and went off and fought for Canada. And but then when they're there, realizing that life is very different. There's so much so much more. There's so much out there that is not available to us back in our little reses. So the from about the 50s, like when I went to residential school, I know that there were the older students who were going into Cranbrook for high school. And of course, that's what I also did too. So I went from grade 1 to grade 8 at the residential school, being taught by the nuns. And then in grade 9, went into Cranbrook and went to Mount Baker. Mount Baker, that's still there. Ginme. That's our name for Mount Baker. And yeah, so I went to school there and eventually left the area. We didn't have a college at the time, so I got my I went to college in Victoria, got my diploma in business administration. I decided that I wanted to do accounting. That was what I was going to pursue because I figured that I could go anywhere in the world. Everybody needs to count their money. So I figured I'd be able to work wherever I went. So after I finished my diploma, my own people said, you know how to count money? Well, you can come home and and help us make some so we can start counting our money. So long story short, I thought that I was going to travel the world and have a whole bunch of different experiences. I left college, came back, was elected chief, and 30 years later kind of lifted my head up and thought, my God, 30 years have gone by and we have done so much though. I'm so proud of us as a nation. As the Ktunaxa Nation and the Shuswap Indian Band, we have done so much. So now I want to go on because I know that time is ticking by as it does. So our residential school shut down in 1970. And just before it shut down, the federal government started talking with our chiefs here of the 5 bands. And the Oblates had been talking with the federal government saying that they were prepared to turn over the building and 327 acres around the building to the federal government, as opposed to the church hanging onto it, that they were prepared to turn that over, but only if the federal government then would turn it over to our 5 bands. Now, I'm not exactly sure, I don't think that the church has done that kind of thing anywhere else. I don't know what precipitated that, or what kind of pushed that. However, that was the discussion that was had. The federal government accepted that. They said yes, they would do that, and then they came and talked to our people about it. And of course, our people were saying, well, yeah, sure, we'll take it. It is, after all, our land. So yes, we'd love to have some of our land back. So that was turned over to the 5 Indian bands. And it was turned over as Indian Reserve lands, which good and bad. And I'll explain why as we go on. Anyway, for the first, couple of years, it seemed we were talking about, well, I was listening, because I was still very young. I was not involved in too much, just in my early 20s. So I wasn't really involved in too much of those discussions, but there was a lot of discussion about, what could be done with these buildings. And it was very quickly realized that what in fact we had was a huge white elephant, because a huge building like that takes an awful lot of money to keep it from freezing, especially on a day like today. If any of you are here in the Rocky Mountain Trench, it's darn cold. Yeah, so how do you keep a huge, big old building like that? How do you keep that going? We had a couple of discussions, then started having discussions with the provincial government. They were thinking that they would lease it from us and run it as a type of facility, some social facility. And then that fell through. So for the next 20 years, it sat empty. And it was just getting to be really, really bad, really ugly. By then, I had come back to my community, been elected, and through the 80s, we were talking about, we realized we were going to have to do something with it. In the meantime, There was the lands around it. You know, we didn't just leave those. We had secondary use for those lands. Dan Joe was out there haying, and he took a lot of hay off those fields. And yeah, so it was just, the building was getting very, very in really bad shape. And we started talking with the, well, first of all, a very important part of the story is that in a band meeting, there was some discussion. We were talking then very seriously about how we were going to revive our Ktunaxa language, how we were going to be able to hang on to it, because we realized that there were very, very few speakers left, and they were all our grandparents. Our parents and grandparents were the speakers, and there were very few children that were learning the language, and we needed to do something about that. And same thing with just practicing our culture. We had some of our elders that started to bring that back, realizing that we were, as a people, ready for much of our spirituality, our spiritual dances and songs, and all of those things could be brought back, and they were bringing those back. So we were in a meeting and talking about how much we had lost and how pitiful we were, because, you know, we had lost so much in these residential schools. They'd really done us bad. And one of our elders, she was sitting there and she said, in Ktunaxa, she told us, you know, like, stop with the complaining. If you think you've lost so much in that building, go back in there and get it. And then she ended off by saying, you only lose something if you refuse to pick it up again. Well, we didn't know what she meant. If you looked at that building, I mean, it had busted windows. The floors had water freezing, and like, it was just, it needed to be. The only thing left for it to do was to knock it down. So we started to think, well, okay, before we go to that step, let's see if there is something we can do about it. So we were able to get a grant from the government and put together a feasibility study on, you know, what could we do? We started talking with our communities. We had 2 years of what I call our own internal marketing. 2 years of talking about what are we going to do with this building. We had many of my generation saying, knock it down. You know, it's got such a bad history. Like, it hurt me really bad. It hurt my family. Just knock it down. But then we also had a growing mindset that, well, no, this is ours. Like, are we going to be just, we're going to let what went on there, what happened to us, we're going to let that be our legacy? No. We've got this building, we can do something with it. And I'm so grateful today that that particular sense that is what grew. And that's what people wanted to do. So after 2 years, because remember, I said that the federal government had turned the building and the lands over to us as Indian reserves. So all the rules that apply to in every Indian reserve apply to us. So we had to have 5 referenda, and we had to have 5 positive votes. Each of the communities, you know, all their voting had to be in line with whatever we were going to be doing with the building. If even one band said nope, the other 4 said yes. There's no such thing as democracy, you know, where the majority rules when it comes to Indian reserves and Indian, the Indian Act. No, everybody has to agree or you can't do anything. Luckily, because of those 2 years that we did of the internal marketing and making sure that everybody was heard, when people went to the ballot box and voted, everyone voted or every community voted in favor of going ahead and doing something with the building. We had one community that was 100%, everyone who voted yes, we have to do something with that building. It's our building, it's up to us to do something. So again, it's a long story. It took us 10 years. we went with the business plan of building a resort there. And then we had the hotel. We have 125 rooms. We have also, this was now in the 90s, and that was a time when the golf course was really coming back, in a big way. And so of course here in the Columbia Valley, we have all kinds of golf courses that were built all around that same time. So that fit in with the plan. So we've got a golf course. And the golf course that we had built is professional length golf course where you can have pro type tournaments here. And at the same time, the provincial government changed hands, and the NDP were back in for a while there, and they made changes to the legislation around gaming and opened it up to all communities across British Columbia, including Indian reserves. And so there was 6 applications that went in from various Indian reserves, including us as not just as one reserve. We went in as a collective, wanting to put a casino into our resort. And we were successful. We were able to get a license from the government, and we were able to go ahead and put that casino in there, which has really been very very good for the resort, because when you have a resort that is off the beaten track, that you need to be able to bring people here, the more that you can offer for them to do, the more successful you're going to be. So we worked with with a couple of partners. First of all, we were working with Coast Hotels. They were going to be the brand name that we would have on the I'm sorry, my granddaughter is trying to tell me something here. Honey, I can't right now, okay? So we went with Coast Hotels for a little bit. And one of the things that I did learn from and then we went with, after when Coast Hotels was not able to stay with us, we went with Delta Hotels. And one of the things that I did learn as a very, very important lesson, because, you're talking with like 5 Indian bands who we had no experience in tourism. We had no experience in Indigenous tourism. And yet we're getting into this, and we're jumping in, full bore. So what I learned from, we had the president of it was Delta Hotels was out here, and I was talking with him about, how beautiful it is here. Said, we've got the Rocky Mountains, like Fisher Peak. If you've ever been here, you'll know what I'm talking about. If you haven't been here, you got to come and see it, because it takes take your breath away. It's beautiful. Mountains, river, we've got this big old building that cleans up really nice. It's quite beautiful. So this resort, we've got the history that goes with that resort. We've got the golf course, got the casino. So, we've got all these wonderful pieces. And so I'm, telling him like how we're going to, this is going to be a really good business venture that we're getting into, because, it's so beautiful here. And he said, Sophie, he said, the world is full of beautiful places. He said, what you have to realize is that in order to be successful in this industry, you need to figure out what makes you special. And it's that experience that you're sharing with your guest. So it went right back to what Mary Paul was telling us. There's not a whole lot of resorts you're going to go to that was a former Indian residential school that has that dark history, where the people themselves determined on their own, with nobody else telling us what we should be doing or shouldn't do. We decided on our own to take what was so negative in our past and turn it into something beautiful and something positive for all future generations. And it's something that is good for us as a people, as the Indigenous people here in our homelands, And it's good for all those who have made our homelands their home. And it's good for all people who are coming here to visit us, to have that experience, to know that you can move on. You can come from a history that is, that's really tough. You know, that it was not good. And it created a lot of hurt. And it still has its effects today. I am not by any means glossing over and trying to make it sound like, you know, everything is beautiful and wonderful. It's not. I mean, just this year alone, we have had one drug overdose after another of our young people. It's heartbreaking. We have a lot of work to do. But we have taken something and we've turned it around for ourselves. And we have created something that future generations can continue to know what our history was, not gloss over it, but know that you can move ahead. You don't have to be a victim. That is one of the things that I firmly believe in. And I'm, you know, I'm asked quite often particularly by the media. And I'll say, no, I'm not a victim. I was definitely victimized as a child. There is no doubt about that. There was nothing I could do about that. My people were victimized. We're not victims now. We have taken back. And we determine what our future is going to be. We were affected by residential schools. We're affected with every announcement that comes out, like what came out just a couple of days ago from CSHAT. Every one of our residential schools has a really bad history, has a sad history. And it's something that is the truth that I'm talking about that needs to be understood by all Canadians. It needs to be understood by all peoples, that these types of things have happened here in Canada, as they have in other parts of the world. But once you understand that, you accept that that is the truth, that's what we have to deal with, then you know how you can move forward. You know what you have to avoid in future generations. You know the kind of foundation that you must build for your children so that they can stand strong and they cannot be victimized that way again. So it's 5:30. I hope, I mean, I know that I probably just created a whole lot more questions, but I hope that I have shared enough that you can understand that why the truth is important and why it's not to be feared. It's not to be felt ashamed about. It is to be understood, to be accepted, so that we can all work together. As the neighbors that we are, we can all work together to make a better future for all of our children, because we all have beautiful, beautiful children and grandchildren, great-grandchildren. And it's the least that they deserve is for us to be working together like this. So, Jenna, I think we're going to be doing some questions, and I'll try and answer. I probably won't have too many answers, but I will try. So.
Well, first of all, thank you so much, Sophie. That was incredible. I was so excited to listen to your stories, and you did not disappoint. It's a hard story, but it's a beautiful story. And I just love that everyone's rising above and really trying to make a difference, and just the resilience is just incredible. So thank you. All right, let's look at some of these questions. Jade, how many do you think we have time for?
Well, I was just going to share in the chat. We do understand that people have time constraints with life and things, and we'd all love to stay. So if you do have to leave, we totally understand that that is necessary. Perhaps if we could take just another 10 minutes of your time, Sophie, and of your wisdom. So just maybe 2 or 3.
Okay.
Yeah, that's fine for me.
Okay.
You're so skinny.
I like, so one is any good books to learn and understand more. Do you have any books that you like to recommend, Sophie, that just to learn more? I'm not sure if it's about residential schools or just our history in general. But do you have any favorite books?
Well, the some of the sort of more recent ones, like the one that always comes to mind right away is books like Jodi's book with Truth and Reconciliation, Jody Wilson-Raybould's book, Truth and Reconciliation. The other is Inconvenient Indian. I think that is a really, really good good book for kind of more of a global understanding of the truth and about, and when you figure that I'm forgetting the author's name. I feel badly about that because I know I've read a lot of his work. So I know somebody's going to tell me, oh yeah, and I just saw 5 Little Indians, Thomas King, yes. I just saw 5 Little Indians on there too, and that's fabulous.
Okay.
There are a lot of books out there.
There are.
But I liked I felt that, and I tell like a lot of people that ask me, they just want to they want to start on this journey of understanding the truth of our history here in Canada. Say, well, it's a good place to start is Inconvenient Indians. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. And Michelle's book, I see a lot of people suggesting that. Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah. Thank you. I see Braiding Sweetgrass. I just bought that for my granddaughter for Christmas. That's another good one. Yes. Yes, and they call me number 1. Yes, Chief Sellers. That's her personal story. Yes.
Okay. Let's see here. Getting a lot more. So it's just trying to see. This one I'm curious about too, because the Indian Act we still have, and this person was wondering, what do you support doing with the Indian Act and why? And I know it's such a challenging question to answer because they're
yeah, that sort of is another whole subject matter that needs to be talked about. Yes, it does. So just like in a nutshell, you got the Indian Act, you replace it with a modern day treaty. That and in my mind, the having a modern day treaty that is that's fairly negotiated and that is honorably implemented, that is true reconciliation, because a modern day treaty talks about the sharing of land, resources, governing authority, like all the jurisdictions that should be with Indigenous people as opposed to being with various levels of governments. All of that. That's what you need to do with the Indian Act. And so it's not something that you can just write a white paper on like our present Prime Minister's dad tried to do. He and Jean Chrétien, they wrote a white paper just to get rid of the Indian Act. You can't do that.
No, you can't.
Even the courts tell us that you can't do that. Yeah. So that's, in my mind, that is what we as Ktunaxa will eventually, we will replace the Indian Act ourselves with a modern day treaty.
That's awesome. What was the decision like to keep the name of the resort as St. Eugene's? Has a Tinaha name been considered?
Yeah, we had all those discussions, and again, we
Right.
decided to stay with St. Eugene because we didn't want to put a Ktunaxa name on that. We accept its history. It is a former Indian residential school. And we are listening to the advice we got from that elder who was at one point president of Delta Hotels and had done that for that. He'd been in the business for, I think, about 40 years at the time that he gave us that piece of advice. You take what makes you special, and that is what you share with your guest. What makes us special is that we are a former Indian residential school, and we have taken that and turned it into this beautiful resort, which is something for our future generations to enjoy, all future generations to enjoy, never forgetting where we came from.
That's awesome. Okay. What does schooling look like for the children of your community today? Is there a place for teaching the heritage languages?
Yes. Yes, that's where, yeah, my granddaughter just came from. We have Apamnik Elementary here at in Apam. And yeah, we have our language, Ktunaxa, as much Ktunaxa as possible is in there within our school. We have pretty soon, I hope it's going to warm up a little bit, because they'll be doing like their winter camp where they go out and go up on the res, pitch a couple of teepees and spend the night in the cold.
Amazing.
I'm glad it's my grandchildren doing that. I don't want to be doing it.
Okay, me neither.
Something wonderful things about culture, but gee, it's nice to be in a warm house too.
That's right. Was walking into
Yeah,
a
just
world.
Okay, just hang. Oops.
Maybe time for just one more, Jenna.
Sure, yeah. This one is
Yeah,
just
sorry
about,
about that.
no,
Go ahead.
gosh, no, this is our lives, right? I love it. It's how we live. The last one is just about just how you respond to pushback for teaching, you know, our history in schools, and how do we respond to that? This person is from the United States, and so the Native Americans there also went to boarding schools, which were similar to residential schools. So they're just wondering, yeah, how if you've experienced pushback for I'm assuming it's residential schools as teaching it. How do you respond to that?
I'm sorry, I don't know that I fully understand what the question is. The pushback, it comes from the general public. Is that what they're saying when you're trying to teach truth?
Yeah, so
Yes, okay.
So I've experienced it too, is talking
Yes.
about residential schools in
Yes.
school, that there has from the general public and from parents that push back about explaining our
Yes.
truth. And
Yes,
just
yes. I know, I understand the question now, and I know that, you know, we've got pushback, and I think it was just in the last day or so, you know, again, there was that whole idea that, you know, maybe the residential schools weren't as bad as they say. Well, I don't know if you can have find unmarked graves of children at a school and say, well, it couldn't have been that bad. I don't know where you're coming from. So, yeah, but then, you know, I think that as human beings, like we're just, seems to me that we always have to be that way, where we can, it's difficult to accept the truth if it doesn't fit in with, you know, just whatever we've, you know, whatever our, what we consider to be our foundation of truth. If it somehow affects that, then you have to fight against it. And it's that foundation of truth at the time of like when our children are in school, when they're learning that's where you get that foundation of truth, and then it's a little bit more difficult to carry on that kind of belief that the colonization was a good thing, for everyone. I think that, all you can really do is continue with like what I do is I just continue with my own message.
Mhm.
What I've shared with you today, I continue with that, and I continue to share that as often as I can, wherever I can. And yeah, I don't expect that everyone's going to be happy with what I have to say. That's okay.
That's
You know,
okay.
that's if you want to have more of a discussion about it, I'm happy to have that discussion. If you've got a mind like a steel trap and absolutely nothing's going to get in, well, that's the way it is.
That's okay too. Yeah.
Yeah.
I read somewhere that it was like if these children could had to experience this, then other children should be able to listen about it, right?
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
just so true to me, is that we had all these children having this horrific childhood, and
Mhm.
part of our truth. And I just love what you said about we need to do this for all children, like so they have
Yes.
a better life. I love that, and it rings so true to me that we want what's best for all children, not just Indigenous children, non-Indigenous.
That's right.
It's best for all. And Indigenous people really say that when they want when we start saying what's going to be good for our Indigenous students, then it always says what's good for Indigenous students is good for all students. And that's what we
That's
really
right.
want. It's a really
Yes.
different world where we can walk together and have a good heart and a good mind. I think that's
Yeah.
really what we want.
Yeah. That is very, very true. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for taking time out of your, I know, busy schedule to share your story here. Such an honor. So thank you.
Well, it's a real honor for me to have this opportunity to speak to so many people. I mean, it says on there 543, 542 now, like that's mind-blowing to me. So
Me too.
thank you, each and every single one of you, 543 or however many there was of you. Thank you so much for just giving me a little bit of your time to hear what our story is here within Amakas Ktunacha and with the Shuswap Indian Band. And we're just we're grateful anytime we have a chance to share our story.
Yeah.
I think it's really important.
So Sukani, Cook's Jam, thank
Yes. So hey. So
Sukani.
yeah, our way, our saying is Dachta on Winnicket, which is like, okay, later, see ya.
I love it.
So everybody, Dachta on Winnicket.
And the wickets.
That's right. Okay. Have a wonderful evening, everyone.
You too.
Yeah. Bye-bye now.
Bye.